The candlelight flickered across the polished mahogany table, casting long shadows that mirrored the coldness in my parents' eyes. It was supposed to be a family dinner, a ritual of forced smiles and unspoken resentments in our sprawling estate. But as I sat there 26 and freshly quit from my high-powered bank job to chase ethical investing, the venom spilled out. "You're stupid and useless," Mom sneered, her voice slicing through the air like a knife. Dad chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Get a real job, Clara. Stop making us look bad in front of everyone." The relatives nodded awkwardly, my brother Thomas basking in their praise as the golden child. My dreams dismissed like crumbs on the floor. I said nothing. No outburst, no tears. Just a quiet push back from the table, my chair scraping the marble floor like a final exhale. I left the room, the weight of their laughter echoing behind me, vowing in silence that this humiliation would fuel something unbreakable. That night, as they settled into the living room with their evening news ritual, the TV screen lit up. There I was, poised on Bloomberg, announcing my firm's latest coup, managing a $1 billion ethical investment fund. The anchor hailed me as a visionary, my net worth flashing in bold, a billion-dollar empire built from the ashes of their doubt. The room fell deathly silent. Dad's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. For the first time, he saw me not as the failure, but as the force they'd underestimated. But this is just the beginning. Stick around and you'll uncover the shocking twists, betrayals from those I trusted most, a family secret that shattered everything, and the ultimate revenge that turned their world upside down. By the end, you'll feel the sweet rush of justice served, proof that silence can roar louder than words. What happened next will leave you breathless. My name is Clara Miller, 26 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was a rising star at one of Wall Street's most prestigious private banks, the kind of place where my father's name opened doors, and my mother's expectations kept them locked tight. I walked away from a 6-figure salary, a corner office, and the promise of partnership to start Aurora Capital, a tiny ethical investment fund that most people in my world considered a joke. Tonight, that joke was about to be served with the soup. The dining room of the Miller family home in Greenwich had not changed in 20 years. Crystal chandeliers cast a brittle light over the long mahogany table where silver candelabras stood like sentries between Waterford Place settings. The walls, paneled in dark walnut, absorbed every sound except the deliberate clink of forks against Limoges porcelain. My parents sat at opposite ends, Richard at the head, Evelyn at the foot, flanked by aunts, uncles, and cousins who had flown in for what Mother insisted was just a casual Sunday supper. Casual in our house meant black tie for the men and pearls for the women. Casual meant no one spoke unless spoken to, and no one spoke the truth at all. I sat midway down the left side, the same chair I had occupied since childhood. My navy sheath dress, the only color that did not match the monochrome perfection around me. Across from me, Thomas, 24, Harvard Medical, already engaged to a senator's daughter, smiled the easy smile that had always come naturally to him. He wore success the way other people wore cologne, lightly, confidently, impossible to ignore. The first course arrived, chilled cucumber soup in shallow bowls, and the conversation began its predictable orbit around Thomas, his residency match at Johns Hopkins, his research grant, the way he had single-handedly raised the profile of the Miller name in academic medicine. My father's voice carried the pride of a man who believed his legacy was secure. My mother's laughter tinkled like ice in a glass, sharp and fleeting. Then Aunt Lydia, emboldened by her second martini, turned to me. "And Clara, dear, whatever are you doing these days, still playing with that little charity thing?" The table stilled. Forks paused midair. I felt the weight of every gaze settle on me like dust on forgotten furniture. I set my spoon down carefully. "It's an investment fund, Aunt Lydia. We focus on sustainable enterprises. Last quarter, we returned 14% to our limited partners." Mother's lips pursed. 14%. How quaint. "Richard, didn't you clear 32 on the Meridian deal alone?" Father chuckled, the sound rich and indulgent. 38, Evelyn. But who's counting? He lifted his wineglass in a mock toast. To Thomas, who understands what real returns look like. The laughter rippled again, warmer this time directed at me. I tasted copper where I had bitten the inside of my cheek. Uncle Harold leaned forward, his cufflinks glinting. Clara. Sweetheart, why throw away a perfectly good career? Your father's friend at the bank. Charles Langford. He could have you back tomorrow. Vice president by 30 guaranteed. I opened my mouth to answer, but Mother cut across me. She's always been stubborn. Remember when she insisted on that ridiculous piano phase hours wasted on scales when she could have been preparing for the SAT? She turned to the table at large. We indulged her, of course. And look where it got her playing make-believe with other people's money. The words landed like slaps. I felt heat rise in my throat, but I kept my voice level. Aurora Capital isn't make-believe. We're funding solar grids in rural Senegal. Clean water initiatives in stupid and useless mother said the phrase delivered with the same casual cruelty she once used to scold me for tracking mud on the foyer marble. That's what you are, Clara. Stupid for walking away from real opportunity, useless for dragging our name through whatever hippie nonsense you're peddling now. Father raised an eyebrow. Language, Evelyn. Oh, please. She's 26, not 6. Time she heard the truth. Mother dabbed the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin. Thomas passed the rolls. Thomas obeyed, his eyes flicking to me with something that might have been pity if he had ever learned the shape of it. The conversation pivoted smoothly back to him, his upcoming presentation at the Mayo Clinic, the lake house he and his fiancée were considering in New Hampshire. My existence shrank to the width of my placemat. I stared at my untouched soup, watching the green swirl like a tiny drowning forest. Somewhere beyond the French doors, the grandfather clock in the hall struck 8. Its chime was the only honest sound in the room. Then the television in the adjoining sitting room, always on, always muted during meals, flashed a breaking news banner. I turned my head, drawn by the flicker of red. The volume had been left low enough to hear the anchor's voice drift through the doorway like smoke. Ongoing federal investigation into fraud at one of Wall Street's largest hedge funds. Sources say executives knowingly inflated asset values to lure institutional investors. The screen cut to file footage. Men in suits being led from a glass tower in handcuffs. Reporters shouting questions. Ticker symbols plunging in real time. I recognized the building. I had attended mixers on its penthouse floor. Charles Langford had once introduced me to the CEO as Richard Miller's brilliant daughter. Mother noticed my attention. "Turn that off," she snapped at the maid hovering near the doorway. "We're eating," but I was already standing. My chair made no sound as it slid back, years of practice in a house where noise was a sin. Every eye followed me, waiting for the outburst, the tears, the dramatic exit they could dissect later over brandy. I gave them none of it. Instead, I walked the length of the table, past the crystal, past the cousins who suddenly found their napkins fascinating, past Thomas's smirk and Mother's triumphant glare. At the threshold, I paused just long enough to meet Father's eyes. He looked startled, as if he had forgotten I was capable of movement. The television anchor continued oblivious. Whistleblowers now coming forward with evidence of systemic corruption. I stepped into the sitting room. The screen bathed the darkened space in electric blue. For a moment, I stood transfixed by the parade of ruined reputations, the reminder that empires built on lies could crumble overnight. An idea, sharp, cold, and perfectly formed, took root in the silence they had forced upon me. Behind me, Mother's voice floated through the doorway, laced with satisfaction. Finally, some peace and quiet. I didn't argue. I just left the table, and that silence became the loudest promise I ever made. As I stepped out of the dining room and into the shadowed hallway, the echo of my own footsteps felt like the first honest sound I'd made all evening. The grandfather clock ticked louder now, each strike pulling me backward through the years, dragging me down corridors of memory I had sealed shut long ago. I paused at the foot of the grand staircase, my hand on the polished banister, and let the house itself speak. The Miller mansion had always been more museum than home. Its walls lined with portraits of ancestors who stared down with the same judgmental eyes my parents wore tonight. But somewhere beneath the scent of beeswax and old money, another smell lingered. Rosin and dust, the faint perfume of the music room where everything had first cracked open. I was 8 the first time Mother compared me to Thomas. It was Christmas morning, and the living room glittered with tinsel and the glow of a 12-foot Fraser fir. Thomas, 6 and already charming, had unwrapped a junior chemistry set, beakers, test tubes, a microscope that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. He held it up like a trophy, and Father clapped him on the back with pride that shook the ornaments. My gift sat beside it, a leather-bound sketchbook and a set of professional watercolor pencils. I remember the weight of them in my small hands, the way the colors promised worlds I could build without anyone's permission. Mother's smile never reached her eyes. Art is lovely, Clara, but Thomas is going to cure cancer one day. You need something with a future. She took the sketchbook, flipped through the blank pages, and set it aside as if it were already ruined. That afternoon, while Thomas mixed glowing solutions under Father's watchful gaze, I was marched to the music room and seated at the Steinway Grand. Piano builds discipline, Mother declared. Discipline builds success. The lid was closed over the keys like a coffin. Thomas's achievements became the yardstick for my existence. When he won the regional spelling bee in 3rd grade, my perfect report card was dismissed with a wave. Anyone can memorize facts, Clara, Thomas thinks. When he scored the winning goal in youth soccer, my watercolor that took 1st place at the county fair was relegated to the back of a drawer. Sports teach leadership, Father said. Art teaches sensitivity. We have enough of that. Relatives cooed over Thomas's every milestone, his first violin recital, his acceptance to the gifted program, the scholarship to science camp, while my own victories were met with polite nods and swift subject changes. I learned early that love in our house was a finite resource, and Thomas held the only key. By 12, my fingers had memorized Beethoven and Bach under the iron rule of Mrs. Hargrove, the instructor Mother hired to correct my posture. I hated the metronome's relentless tick, hated the way Mother stood behind me with arms crossed, tapping her foot in perfect time. But I loved the moments after lessons when Mrs. Hargrove left and I was alone with the piano. I would lift the fallboard and let my hands wander, inventing melodies that had no name, no grade, no purpose except to exist. The music room became my sanctuary, its tall windows overlooking the rose garden where petals fell like silent confessions. The piano itself was old, its ebony finish scarred from decades of use, the ivory keys yellowed and warm. A brass plate on the music desk read, "To my dearest Marion, may your songs never fade." I never knew who Marion was. Mother claimed it was a previous owner's sentiment, but the inscription felt like a secret shared between the instrument and me. Mother discovered my improvisations one spring afternoon. I was 14, lost in a minor key piece that poured out every unspoken ache. She burst through the door, her face flushed with fury. Enough daydreaming. You have the Wharton pre-college application to finish. She slammed the lid so hard the strings vibrated in protest. Finance is your future, Clara. Numbers don't lie. Art does. That night she replaced my watercolor set with a graphing calculator and enrolled me in summer economics camp. I begged to keep the piano lessons. She compromised 1 hour a week, but only classical repertoire, no frivolous originals. My sketches were confiscated, my sketchbook replaced with balance sheets. I learned to hide my longing the way other girls hid diaries. The final blow came at 16. I had won the National Young Arts Scholarship full tuition to RISD, a portfolio review with gallery owners, a future I could taste. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday, thick cream envelope sealed with gold wax. I carried it to the breakfast table like a holy relic. Father was reading the journal, Mother sipping black coffee. Thomas, home from boarding school, lounged in his lacrosse jersey. I slid the letter across the table. It's RISD, I said, voice trembling with hope. They want me for painting. Mother didn't look up. Father set his paper down, scanned the letter, and handed it to Thomas. Impressive, he said, but impractical. Thomas turned it over as if checking for a price tag. Mother finally spoke. We're proud of your effort, Clara. But Thomas has a situation. Thomas had racked up $23,000 in credit card debt, private tutors, custom equipment. A spring break trip to Aspen he couldn't miss. The collectors were calling. Mother's solution was swift liquidate the scholarship fund. "It's only fair," she said. "Family first." I watched the letter disappear into her briefcase, the wax seal cracking like my heart. That night, I sat at the piano and played until my fingers bled. The scars on the keys seemed to deepen as if the instrument itself mourned with me. No one comforted me. No one apologized. Thomas got a new car to celebrate his maturity. I got a lecture on gratitude. The emotional neglect was a slow starvation love doled out in crumbs, always conditional, always measured against Thomas's shine. I learned to swallow the hurt to smile when expected to excel in silence. The piano became my only witness, its strings absorbing every tear I refused to shed in public. I practiced finance with the same ferocity I once gave to art, earning perfect scores, internships, accolades that finally earned a nod from father. But inside, something calcified. Resilience, yes, but the kind forged in fire, not warmth. Every note I played back then was a whisper for freedom. I just didn't know it yet. The last chord of that forbidden melody still hung in the air of my memory when I stepped onto the trading floor of Langford and Associates for the first time at 22. Fresh from Wharton and clutching a resume my father had personally delivered to Charles Langford. The building itself was a glass and steel monument on Park Avenue, its lobby echoing with the hushed reverence of old money. Charles greeted me in his corner office with a handshake that felt more like a contract signing. "Your father says you're a natural," he told me, eyes already calculating my usefulness. "We'll see." From that day forward, the bank became my cage, gilded and gleaming, but a cage all the same. Charles ran the private wealth division like a feudal lord. Every morning at 7:30, I arrived to find my inbox flooded with his revisions, red-lined spreadsheets. Memos demanding I tighten the language, post-it notes stuck to my monitor with phrases like sloppy or redo. He micromanaged my client pitches down to the font size, questioned every risk assessment, and rewrote my emails before I could hit send. Colleagues whispered that I was the boss's pet project. The truth was closer to indentured servitude. My desk sat in direct view of his glass-walled office where he could watch me like a specimen under glass. If I lingered too long over lunch, he'd page me with a single word: focus. If I dared suggest a sustainable fund allocation, he'd laugh and say, "Ethics don't compound, Clara." The belittling was constant but subtle, 1,000 paper cuts. During team meetings, he'd interrupt my presentations to praise analysts half my age. "See how Jenkins structures his slides, clean." Professional. My own work, meticulous data-driven, would be dismissed with a wave. "Good effort, Miller. Next time aim higher." He'd assign me grunt work, reconciling trades, formatting pitch books, then criticize the speed. When I closed my first 7-figure account, he took credit in the quarterly newsletter listing my name in small print as support. My father, informed over martinis at the Yale Club, sent a text, "Charles says you're learning. Keep it up. No congratulations. No pride. Just the assumption that I existed to serve the family brand." The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in October, 3 years into my sentence. Charles summoned me to his office at 6:30, the city lights smearing across the windows like wet paint. On his desk lay the Meridian Capital Dealbook, a $400 million private placement for a fracking company with a history of environmental violations. The numbers were obscene, projected IRR of 42%, built on aggressive depletion models and offshore tax shelters. Charles leaned back, fingers steepled. "We need this closed by Monday. Your job is to massage the risk disclosures. Make the EPA fines look like rounding errors." I stared at the projections. The company had buried a spill in North Dakota, paid hush money to regulators, and was now shopping for investors to fund expansion. "This is fraud," I said quietly. "The due diligence is cooked." Charles smiled the way a cat smiles at a cornered mouse. "It's business, Clara. Your father signed off on similar structures in the 90s. Reputation is everything. He slid a revised disclosure across the desk, my name already on the signature line. Sign. Or find another job. And good luck explaining that to Richard. Humiliation burned through me, hot and immediate. I thought of every time I'd swallowed pride, every weekend lost to his revisions, every dream deferred. I stood. I won't sign. His laugh was soft, almost paternal. Then you're done here. Pack your things. I'll call your father myself. He picked up the phone, already dialing. Richard. It's Charles. Your daughter's having a crisis of conscience. Yes again. I left the office without another word, the deal book unsigned on his desk. The elevator ride down felt like falling. In the lobby, I stood under the marble arches, rain drumming against the glass doors, and realized I had nowhere to go but forward. That night, I drove to the family estate unannounced. The gate swung open automatically, my keycard still worked, and I parked beneath the porte-cochere where valets once took my bicycle. Inside the house was quiet, the staff dismissed early. I found Father in his study, a tumbler of scotch in hand, reviewing quarterly reports. He looked up surprised. Clara, Charles said you walked out. What the hell were you thinking? I closed the door behind me. I was thinking about integrity. Something you used to talk about before Meridian Capital became your legacy. His face hardened. Watch your tone. Charles has been loyal to this family for 30 years. Loyal. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket, the one I'd copied from the shared drive before leaving. Then why is there a file labeled Miller Contingency 1998? Offshore accounts, backdated contracts, payments to a shell company called Hale Holdings. Ring any bells? Father's glass paused halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face. Where did you get that? Doesn't matter. What matters is you buried it. Victor Hale. Your old partner took the fall for the losses, but the money trail leads straight back here. You cooked the books to save the family name, didn't you? Let Hale's reputation tank while you rebuilt on his bones. He set the glass down carefully. It was complicated. Markets crashed. We had obligations. Obligations to lie. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. You taught me reputation was everything, then sold yours for a headline. And now you expect me to do the same. For the first time, Father looked old. Clara, sit down. We can fix this. There's no we anymore. I placed my resignation letter on his desk, printed on Langford letterhead, dated tomorrow. I'm done being the obedient daughter who cleans up your messes. I walked out of the study past the portraits of ancestors who had probably done worse. In my childhood bedroom, I packed a single duffel clothes laptop, the worn leather journal I'd kept since RISD rejection. The piano in the music room called to me one last time, but I didn't play. I couldn't. Not here. At the threshold, I turned back to Father, who had followed me silently. I'll succeed, I said. Not for you. Not for the name. On my own terms. With integrity you never had. I left the house that night, the gates closing behind me, with a finality that echoed through my bones. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet stone and possibility. I drove south on the Merritt Parkway, windows down, the city lights fading in the rear view. For the first time in my life, I was free, terrified, broke, and utterly alone, but free. That day, I didn't just quit my job, I quit being their pawn. The headlights of my old sedan cut through the darkness as I merged onto the highway, the Miller estate shrinking to a single point of light in the mirror before vanishing entirely. I had no destination, only the certainty that every mile put distance between me and the version of myself they had sculpted. By dawn, I was in a cheap motel off I-95, the duffel bag, my only possession, the resignation letter still warm in my pocket. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by the sound of gates closing. When I woke, the resolve that had carried me through the night hardened into a plan I would build something honest, something mine. Aurora Capital was born in that stale room, scribbled on the back of a coffee shop napkin, ethical investments. Transparent returns, a fund that put people before profit. I reached out to the only allies I trusted, 3 classmates from Wharton, who had always talked about changing the system from within. Kelly was the sharpest, quick with numbers, quicker with charm. We met in a Soho loft rented by the hour, laptops balanced on crates, dreams bigger than our bank accounts. Seed money came from my savings, every bonus I had never spent, every birthday check, cashed and hoarded. We filed the LLC, printed business cards on thick cream stock, and pitched to anyone who would listen. Our first close was a $500,000 $1,000 commitment from a retired teacher's pension fund, enough to cover 6 months of rent in a windowless midtown office. For the first time since leaving the bank, I felt the spark of possibility. The betrayal arrived on a Tuesday in early spring, disguised as routine. Kelly had been handling due diligence on a solar startup in Arizona, promising technology solid patents. A management team I had vetted myself. I was finalizing the term sheet when my phone buzzed with an anonymous email, screenshots of our pitch deck valuation models. Even the teacher's commitment letter, all stamped with the logo of Vanguard Equity Partners, our direct competitor. The deal was dead before the ink dried. By Friday, 3 more prospects pulled out, citing confidential information they shouldn't have known. I confronted Kelly in the office after hours, the city lights flickering through the blinds like a strobe. She didn't deny it. Tears streaked her mascara as she slid a folder across the table. Medical bills, foreclosure notices, her mother's name in bold red stamps. They offered $2 million to walk away, she whispered. Mom's cancer treatments. The house. I had no choice. Vanguard had paid her to leak everything, then poached our pipeline. The other partners bailed within the week, terrified of lawsuits. Aurora Capital collapsed before it could crawl, leaving me with $180,000 in personal debt and a reputation in tatters. I moved into a studio the size of a walk-in closet in Bushwick. The walls thin enough to hear the neighbors argue in 3 languages. Creditors called daily. I let them ring. My days blurred into shifts at Brew and Bean, a corner cafe where the espresso machine hissed like an angry cat. I wore a green apron stained with latte foam, memorized orders for oat milk cappuccinos and cold brews with exactly 2 pumps of vanilla. The manager, a kind-eyed woman named Rosa, let me pick up doubles when someone called in sick. Tips went straight to the loan sharks. Pride went out with the trash. Nights I studied SEC filings on my cracked phone, refusing to let the numbers defeat me. Despair came in waves, but I learned to ride them, breathing through the panic, reminding myself that integrity was the only asset they couldn't seize. The turning point arrived on a slow Thursday afternoon, rain tapping the cafe windows like impatient fingers. I was wiping down the pastry case when a man in a tailored coat stepped inside, shaking water from an umbrella. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and settled at the corner table with a tablet and a furrowed brow. I recognized the tension in his shoulders, the look of someone watching a fortune evaporate. When I brought his refill, he was muttering about currency hedges and emerging market exposure. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen, a portfolio heavy in Turkish lira bonds due to roll over in 48 hours. "You're long the lira against the dollar," I said quietly. "The central bank's about to hike rates. If you don't unwind by close of business tomorrow, you'll lose 10 million, maybe more." He looked up startled. "How do you know that?" "I used to run risk models for a living." I kept my voice low, aware of Rosa watching from the register. "The governor's speech leaked this morning on Bloomberg terminals. It's not public yet." He studied me for a long moment, then tapped his phone. Minutes later, he was on a call, voice urgent. I returned to the counter, heart pounding, expecting nothing. When he left, he pressed a folded bill into my hand. Later, I unfolded it to find $100 and a business card, Jonathan Reese, CEO, Reese Clean Energy. I slipped it into my apron pocket and forgot about it until the next morning when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Clara Miller. The voice was calm, confident. "Jonathan Reese, that advice yesterday saved me $10 million. I'd like to return the favor." I stood in the tiny kitchenette of my studio, steam from the kettle curling around my face. For the first time in months, despair loosened its grip. The hardship had stripped me bare, but it had also forged something new, a quiet confidence that no betrayal could touch. I was still broke, still serving coffee, but I was unbroken. He didn't just thank me, he asked for a meeting the next day. The phone call ended with a simple address: Reese Clean Energy's headquarters in Lower Manhattan. Ninth floor, 10 o'clock sharp, and I hung up staring at the cracked screen as if it might dissolve. I had nothing to wear but the black slacks and white blouse I saved for interviews that never came, so I ironed them in the laundromat downstairs while the dryers thumped like a heartbeat. The next morning, I rode the F train with commuters clutching paper cups, my reflection in the window, a stranger with tired eyes and a spine finally straightening. When the elevator opened onto a sunlit atrium of living walls and solar-paneled skylights, Jonathan Reese was waiting beside a reception desk carved from reclaimed redwood. He was taller than I remembered, silver threading his dark hair, the kind of quiet authority that didn't need volume. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. "You look like someone who keeps promises," he said, and led me past glass offices humming with purpose. We settled in a conference room overlooking the Hudson, floor-to-ceiling windows framing tugboats and gulls. He didn't waste time on small talk. "I lost my wife to leukemia 3 years ago." He began, voice steady but edged with something raw. "She spent her last months reading about offshore wind projects that never broke ground because the money men wanted 30% returns yesterday. I promised her I'd build something that mattered." He slid a folder across the table, financials for a portfolio of early-stage clean tech ventures, all stalled for lack of patient capital. "I need someone who sees risk the way Emily did, not as a barrier, but as a bridge. Someone who won't trade integrity for a quarterly bonus." I opened the folder. Inside were term sheets, cap tables, environmental impact studies, $5 million in dry powder earmarked for a new manager. "You're offering me this?" I asked, disbelief tightening my throat. "I'm offering you a chance to restart Aurora Capital under our umbrella. Same name, same ethics, my checkbook. You run it independently. I stay out of the day-to-day unless you ask." His eyes held mine, searching. "I've read the leaked emails from Vanguard. I know what Kelly did. I also know you didn't sue her. That tells me more than any reference." We shook on it before the coffee arrived. Within a week, I had a corner office with a view of the river, a Bloomberg terminal that didn't mock me, and a mandate to deploy capital into companies solving real problems. The first investment was a desalination startup in California, using graphene filters. High risk, higher reward. I structured the deal with downside protection and upside participation tied to water output, not just revenue. Jonathan signed without hesitation. "Emily would have loved this," he murmured, and I felt the weight of a legacy I hadn't earned but suddenly carried. The next 18 months unfolded like a time-lapse of spring. Global demand for renewables surged, governments racing to net zero, corporations pledging carbon neutrality, pension funds desperate for ESG exposure. Aurora Capital rode the wave, but never chased it blindly. We passed on a battery manufacturer cooking its cycle life data, walked away from a wind farm on indigenous land without consent. Instead, we doubled down on a Kenyan microgrid collective run by women engineers, and a Dutch firm turning landfill gas into aviation fuel. Returns compounded 42% in year 1, 68% in year 2. The initial $5 million became $25 million, then $50 million, as high net worth families and European foundations begged for allocation. CNBC ran a segment titled "The Quiet Fund Cleaning Up Wall Street." My face briefly on screen beside a ticker showing Aurora's AUM. Jonathan sent flowers, white peonies, no card, and I kept them on my desk until the petals browned. He began joining my site visits. We flew coach to a solar installation in Oaxaca, boots crunching on red dirt, while children in school uniforms waved from newly lit classrooms. Over dinner in a roadside comedor, he listened as I explained CapEx depreciation schedules, but his questions drifted to the families displaced by the project, the long-term jobs created. "You see the whole picture," he said, refilling my water glass. "Most people see spreadsheets. You see lives." His fingers brushed mine, reaching for the salt, a fleeting contact that lingered longer than it should. Back in New York, the media attention grew. Forbes profiled me as the conscience of capital. The Wall Street Journal dissected our fee structure, 1% management, no carried interest, until investors doubled their money. Jonathan hosted a donor dinner at his Tribeca loft, lofted ceilings, and exposed brick softened by books and photographs of Emily laughing on sailboats. He introduced me not as his fund manager, but as the reason Reese Clean Energy finally sleeps at night. Guests clustered around me, but his gaze followed from across the room, steady and warm. When a hedge fund titan cornered me with condescending questions about impact washing, Jonathan appeared at my elbow, voice calm but cutting. Clara's returns speak for themselves. Maybe worry about your own exposure to stranded assets. The man retreated, and Jonathan's hand settled briefly at the small of my back, protective, proud something more. Late one evening, after a board call, he found me alone in the office reviewing a term sheet for a tidal energy pilot in Nova Scotia. The city sparkled beyond the windows, a constellation of ambition. He poured 2 fingers of scotch and slid one across my desk. "You've built something extraordinary," he said. "But I see the toll it takes. The nights you don't sleep the way you second-guess every decision." He leaned against the window frame, silhouetted against the skyline. "I see you, Clara. Not just the numbers. The woman who could have taken the easy path and chose the harder one because it was right." My pulse stuttered. For years, men had looked at me and seen pedigree potential profit a box to check. Jonathan looked and saw the scars beneath the polish, the fire banked but never extinguished. His admiration wasn't loud, but it was deep-rooted in respect that felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. For the first time in years, a man looked at me and saw more than potential profit. The moment Jonathan's words settled between us, the office lights dimmed automatically for the night cycle, leaving only the glow of the city and the soft hum of servers in the distance. I sat back, heart still racing from the intensity of his gaze, when my assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Miller, there's a Mr. Hale here. No appointment, but he says it's urgent." I frowned. Hale was a name that surfaced in deal rumors like smoke, never the fire itself. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, curious but trusting, and excused himself with a brief touch to my shoulder that lingered just long enough to remind me I was no longer invisible. I straightened my blouse and walked to the lobby, where a man in a charcoal suit waited beneath the living wall, his reflection fractured in the glass. Victor Hale was lean and sharp-featured, mid-60s, with the kind of posture that suggested boardrooms were his natural habitat. His eyes, pale gray, almost silver, locked onto mine with predatory focus. He didn't offer a handshake. "Clara Miller, you've built something interesting. Let's talk." He gestured toward the conference room as if he owned the building. I led the way, pulse steady but alert. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing out the evening bustle. He wasted no time. "I want Aurora Capital. Lock, stock, and ethics. 250 million, all cash, closing in 30 days. The number hit like a gust of wind, enough to make any founder blink. I kept my expression neutral. "We're not for sale." "Everything is," he replied, sliding a single sheet across the table. It was a term sheet. Clean and brutal, full control my team retained for 1 year, non-compete forever. "Your investors will thank you. Reese included." He knew Jonathan's name. Of course he did. I leaned forward. "Why Aurora? You could launch your own green fund tomorrow, because you've done the impossible returns without blood." I admire efficiency. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And because your father and I go way back." The air shifted. I had expected competition, not genealogy. "Richard Miller." He continued, savoring the name. "We partnered in '98 on a real estate roll-up. Hale Holdings took the public hit when the market turned. Your family walked away clean." His tone carried no bitterness, only fact. "I lost 9 figures. Richard kept the Greenwich house, the club membership, the narrative. I kept the scars." I stared at the term sheet, seeing it now for what it was, leverage wrapped in dollars. "You're saying my father hung you out to dry." "I'm saying someone did. Details get fuzzy after 25 years. He tapped the page. "Sign and I bury the past. Refuse and I dig." The room felt smaller. I thought of the offshore files I'd glimpsed at Langford, the way father's face had paled. Victor watched me process, then softened his voice a fraction. There was a woman involved, Marion. Sharp as a tack, your mother's advisor back then. She flagged the risk 6 months early. Evelyn ignored her. Said family reputation couldn't afford caution. He let the name hang, watching for recognition. Marion. The brass plate on the old piano. A coincidence or the first thread in a tapestry I'd never been allowed to see? I folded my arms. You're threatening me with history I didn't write. Testing, he corrected. Your father lost everything because he trusted the wrong people, like I'm trusting you now. The admission was quiet, almost confessional. I could crush Aurora with a phone call. Instead, I'm offering a lifeline. Your move tells me if the apple fell far enough from the tree. His gray eyes held no malice, only calculation, and beneath it something that might have been respect. An ally in disguise, or a wolf in a bespoke suit, I stood signaling the meeting's end. I'll consider your offer. But Aurora isn't a bargaining chip for old grudges. Victor rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. Grudges age poorly. Empires don't. At the door, he paused. Ask your mother about Marion. See what story she tells. Then he was gone, the scent of cedar and power lingering like smoke. I returned to my office, the term sheet heavy in my hand. Jonathan had seen my potential. Victor saw my lineage. For years, I'd accepted the family version of events, father the victim of market forces, Hale, the villain who dragged them down. Now cracks spiderwebbed across that narrative. If Marion had warned them, if Evelyn had silenced her, the bankruptcy was less accident than architecture. What else had been edited for my consumption? I powered down my laptop, the city lights flickering like uncertain stars. Doubt settled in my chest, cold and insistent. The past wasn't buried. It was bait. He didn't just want my company. He wanted to rewrite my family's history again. The elevator ride down from the office felt longer than usual. Victor's parting words echoing in the confined space like a verdict still being decided. I stepped into the crisp evening air, the city's pulse steady under my feet. And for 3 years I let the past stay buried beneath board meetings, term sheets, and the quiet satisfaction of returns that finally spoke for themselves. Aurora Capital had grown into a name whispered with respect in impact circles, its assets under management. Climbing past $500 million, every dollar deployed with the precision of someone who had once lost everything to carelessness. I had not returned to Greenwich, had not answered the sporadic birthday cards or the holiday newsletters that arrived like clockwork. My life was here in glass towers and site visits to wind farms in Jonathan's steady partnership, and the rare, unguarded smiles we now shared over late-night strategy sessions. Then, on a Tuesday in early autumn, my phone rang with a number I had deleted but never forgotten. Evelyn's voice was softer than I remembered, threaded with something that might have passed for contrition if I hadn't known her so well. Clara, darling. It's been too long. She spoke of missing me, of father's health scares, of how the house felt empty without my laughter. The invitation came wrapped in nostalgia, a reunion dinner, just family, a chance to heal old wounds. We were wrong, she said, the words landing like practiced lines from a script. Come home. Let us make it right. I listened in silence, the city traffic a distant roar beyond my office window, and felt the old hooks sink in, not with pain but with calculation. 3 years of distance had sharpened my vision. Remorse from Evelyn Miller was never free. I agreed before she finished her plea. Saturday, I said. I'll be there. Her relief was audible, a small exhale that betrayed more than gratitude. I hung up and stared at the skyline, already mapping the terrain ahead. This was no olive branch. It was reconnaissance. I spent the week preparing like a general before battle, reviewing public records, pulling court filings, consulting a discreet investigator Jonathan recommended. The picture that emerged was grim. Thomas, now a resident at a prestigious Baltimore hospital, faced a malpractice suit that could end his career. A botched spinal procedure, a patient paralyzed, a 7-figure settlement demand. The family's legal fund was depleted. Their social capital stretched thin. They needed money, influence, a way to make the problem disappear. And I, the prodigal daughter turned financier, was their last card. Friday night, I laid out my armor, a charcoal sheath dress, understated pearls. The kind of elegance that whispered power without shouting. I rehearsed responses in the mirror, measured calm, every word a scalpel. Forgiveness was a luxury I couldn't afford, but information was currency, and I intended to spend it wisely. Jonathan offered to drive me. I declined. This was a solo mission. As I packed an overnight bag, I slipped Victor's term sheet into a hidden pocket insurance, or perhaps bait. The drive north took 2 hours each mile, peeling back layers of the girl I had been. The gates recognized my old code and swung open without hesitation, as if the house itself had been waiting. The estate looked smaller than memory, the manicured lawns precise but joyless under the floodlights. Evelyn met me at the door, thinner, her blonde hair streaked with silver arms open in a hug that felt staged for an invisible audience. "You came," she whispered, eyes glassy. Father stood behind her, stooped but still imposing his handshake firmer than I expected. Thomas lingered in the foyer, leaner too, the golden sheen dulled by stress. Dinner was set in the formal dining room, crystal linen, the same chandelier that had witnessed my humiliation years before. They fawned over my success toasts, raised to Aurora's triumphs. Questions about my secret sauce delivered with practiced awe. Beneath the flattery ran the current I had come to read, desperation. Dessert arrived, individual chocolate soufflés, Evelyn's signature, and the mask slipped. Thomas cleared his throat. "There's something we need to discuss." He outlined the lawsuit with the detachment of a medical chart, surgical complication. Aggressive plaintiff's attorney, a deposition scheduled for next month. "The hospital's insurance won't cover punitive damages," he said. "We're looking at millions. Your fund, could you structure something, a loan and investment vehicle?" Evelyn nodded, eyes pleading. "For family, Clara. After everything." I set my spoon down the soufflé, untouched. "You mean after everything you took?" My voice was quiet, but the room stilled. Father shifted uncomfortably. I leaned forward. "I'll consider it. But first we talk terms. And truth." I watched their faces, Evelyn's flicker of fear. Thomas's calculation. Father's resignation. They thought they were reeling me in. They didn't see the line I had already cast. The evening ended with promises of follow-up documents, hugs that lingered too long. A guest room made up with monogrammed towels. I lay awake in the dark, the house creaking around me like an old ship. Every gesture, every word had been a move on a board they thought I still played by their rules. I traced the ceiling cracks with my eyes, planning my counterstroke. They wanted my help to save Thomas, to preserve the facade. I wanted closure on my terms with interest. They wanted my help. I wanted closure. Both of us would get exactly what we deserved. Sleep came in shallow increments. The guest room's silence broken only by the occasional creak of old beams settling into their lies. When morning light filtered through heavy brocade curtains, I rose before the household stirred. Showered in the marble bath that still smelled of Mother's signature lavender soap, and dressed with deliberate care. The charcoal sheath from last night gave way to a tailored navy suit, the jacket nipped at the waist, the skirt falling just below the knee. Professional armor that declared I belonged at the head of any table. Downstairs, the dining room had been transformed overnight, the long mahogany expanse polished to a mirror sheen. Silver candelabras loaded with fresh tapers, place cards handwritten in Evelyn's looping script. My name sat at the head where Father had always presided. The symbolism was not lost on me, nor I suspected on them. They filed in one by one, summoned by the discreet chime of a bell I remembered from childhood. Father first slower on the stairs, his tie slightly askew. Evelyn behind him, pearls gleaming against a cream silk blouse. Thomas' last hair still damp from the shower, the faint scent of his cologne cutting through the aroma of bacon and brioche. Servants' new faces, younger than the staff of my youth, moved with practiced efficiency, pouring coffee, unfolding napkins into laps. Conversation began in the bright, brittle register of people pretending the night before had been a success. Evelyn praised the weather. Father commented on the stock market's morning dip. Thomas asked about traffic from the city. I answered in measured tones, accepting a plate of eggs Benedict I had no intention of eating. The seating arrangement forced their eyes to travel upward to meet mine. I cut my food with precision, the knife's scrape against porcelain, the only sharp sound in the room. The house looks well, I said, letting the compliment hang like bait. Evelyn beamed, launching into renovations, the new Sub-Zero in the kitchen, the reclaimed barnwood in the library. Father nodded approval, but his gaze kept drifting to the folder beside my elbow, the one I had placed there deliberately. Thomas's fingers drummed the tablecloth, a nervous tick he had never mastered. Beneath the civility, contempt flickered in the way Evelyn's smile froze when I mentioned Aurora's latest close in Father's subtle wince at the mention of impact metrics, in Thomas's quick glance at his watch as if time itself might rescue him. The first course cleared, the second arrived filet mignon with a red wine reduction, the meat so tender it barely required a knife. I let them fill the silence with anecdotes designed to flatter how proud they were of my Bloomberg appearances. How often friends asked after me how Thomas's fiancée had clipped an article about Aurora for her scrapbook. Their voices rose and fell in practiced harmony, but I heard the subtext in every pause, every forced laugh. They needed me solvent, influential, willing. I needed them to believe I still cared about blood. Midway through the beef, the television in the adjoining sitting room, larger now, a sleek frame mounted where the old console had stood, flickered to life. The maid had left it on low volume, a morning news loop no one thought to mute. The anchor's voice drifted through the open archway, crisp and professional. Next up, ethical investing's rising star. Clara Miller, founder of Aurora Capital, joins us live from the Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit. My own face filled the screen, poised on a stage in front of 1,000 attendees, the Aurora logo glowing behind me. The clip cut to Kelly, elegant in emerald silk, her redemption public and polished, leaning into the microphone. Clara taught me that profit and purpose aren't mutually exclusive, she said, her smile radiant. She rebuilt trust the old-fashioned way, one honest deal at a time. The dining room went still. Father's fork hovered halfway to his mouth. Evelyn's wineglass paused at her lips. Thomas stared as if the screen had sprouted fangs. On television, past me fielded questions about risk-adjusted returns in emerging markets, my voice calm, authoritative. The irony was exquisite. The daughter they had labeled useless now commanded a platform they could only dream of, while their golden son faced ruin in a courtroom. I watched their reflections in the polished silver Aperni faces, drained of color eyes reflecting the blue glow of their desperation. The anchor closed the segment with Aurora's latest milestone, $1 billion in assets under management, all deployed toward decarbonization. The ticker crawled beneath Aurora Capital Ethical Returns. Outpace traditional funds. 3-1. Evelyn recovered first, setting her glass down with a delicate clink. How wonderful, she said, the words brittle. We always knew you had potential. Father managed a nod, but his hand trembled as he reached for water. Thomas's jaw worked soundlessly, the lawsuit hanging unspoken between us like smoke. I speared a slice of beef, letting the silence stretch until it snapped. The summit was productive, I offered. Several family offices expressed interest in impact allocations. I could introduce you to the right people, of course. Their eyes lit with hunger, the contempt momentarily eclipsed by calculation. Dessert was served, individual Grand Marnier soufflés, risen high and dusted with sugar. I declined mine, folding my napkin with finality. The television looped to weather, but the image of my success lingered in their minds like a brand. I had sat where Father once ruled. I had watched them perform remorse while plotting rescue. The power shift was complete, the irony complete. They needed the billionaire they had mocked. I needed nothing from them except the satisfaction of watching the scales tip. Forgiveness was never free. I just learned to charge it differently. The soufflé dishes were cleared, the coffee refilled one last time, and I rose from Father's chair with the calm of someone who had already won the war they pretended was still a negotiation. I suggested we move to the library for a more comfortable discussion about the proposal they had hinted at all morning. The room smelled of leather bindings and lemon polish, the fire crackling low in the grate, though the day was mild. I took the wingback nearest the window, sunlight striping the Persian rug, and laid a slim leather portfolio on the ottoman between us. Evelyn perched on the edge of the settee, hands folded tight. Father sank into his usual armchair, the one that had once commanded every room. Thomas hovered by the globe, spinning it absently. I opened the portfolio to reveal a single document, elegant letterhead, the words, "Legacy Fund," in raised gold foil. "This is a limited partnership," I began, voice even structured as a public-private initiative with the Department of Energy and the Small Business Administration. Minimum commitment $5 million, preferred 10. Projected IRR 22% over 5 years with tax-advantaged distributions through a Section 181 clean energy credit. I let the numbers settle, watching their pupils dilate the way they once had at Thomas's report cards. The vehicle invests in mature infrastructure, proven solar arrays, battery storage hubs, grid-scale wind. Low volatility government backstop. Your capital preserves the estate fund's Thomas's defense and positions the Miller name at the forefront of the energy transition. Evelyn leaned forward, pearls catching the light. And the risk, mitigated by federal guarantees. Worst-case principal returned in year 4 with inflation adjustment. I slid glossy renderings across the ottoman's sleek facilities in Arizona, transmission lines, snaking through the Midwest logos of Fortune 100 off-takers. Father scanned the pages, the crease between his brows softening for the first time all weekend. Thomas stopped spinning the globe. I continued painting the picture they wanted to see. Family legacy reborn. Thomas's legal cloud dispersed by a settlement funded before discovery, their social circle dazzled by photographs at ribbon cuttings. I spoke of board seats, speaking invitations, a Miller Foundation plaque beside the presidential seal. Every detail was accurate, except the destination of the dollars. The legacy fund existed, registered in Delaware, its charter filed quietly 6 months earlier. But its true purpose was buried 3 layers down in the operating agreement, a perpetual charitable foundation named for Marion, seated to award full-ride scholarships to women over 50 launching second-act businesses. Every penny they committed would bypass turbines and flow straight to classrooms, incubators, mentorship networks. Women like the ones I had met in co-working spaces. Widows restarting after divorce. Retirees pivoting from corporate cages to craft breweries and coding boot camps. Thomas's eyes narrowed as I finished. "I'd like to review the full subscription docs," he said, the physician's precision creeping into his tone. I smiled and handed him a thumb drive. "Of course. Take your time." The others signed provisional letters of intent on the spot. Evelyn's flourish practiced Father's hand steadier than it had been in years. Thomas excused himself to the study. He returned 20 minutes later. Face pale, the drive clenched in his fist. The library door clicked shut behind him, sealing us in amber light. "We need to talk. Alone." I followed him to the conservatory, glass walls fogged with humidity, orchids drooping like eavesdroppers. He didn't sit. The fine print reroutes capital after year 1 to a donor-advised fund. No infrastructure, no returns. This is a charity shell. I leaned against a teak table, palms flat on the warm wood. It's transparent to anyone who reads past page 3. "You knew we wouldn't." His voice cracked with the same entitlement that had once stolen my scholarship. "You're laundering our money into scholarships." "Redirecting," I corrected. "Every dollar will compound in lives, not lies. But you're right, there's more." I stepped closer. Page 47, Exhibit C. The Foundation's advisory board includes access to certain archived correspondence. Emails from 1998. Hale Holdings. A warning from Marion that went unheeded. His breath hitched. "I know you saw them, Thomas. You were home that summer interning at Father's office. You read the risk memo and said nothing because the bonus covered your Porsche lease. Color drained from his cheeks. That was silence for personal gain. Sound familiar? I kept my voice low, surgical. Sign and the archives stay sealed. The settlement fund releases next quarter enough to make the plaintiff disappear. Refuse and the emails surface in discovery. Malpractice is one thing. Conspiracy to defraud is another. He stared at the orchids as if they might sprout answers. I watched the calculation flicker career reputation the fiancé whose father sat on the hospital board. His shoulders sagged. You planned this. Every decimal. I produced the final subscription agreement, pen poised. Your choice, brother. Preserve the family name the honest way, or watch it burn in open court. He took the pen. The nib scratched across paper like ice breaking. When he handed it back, his hand trembled. Mother will never forgive you. She taught me forgiveness has conditions. I tucked the document away. This one is mine. That evening, the wire instructions went out $7 million from the family trust, another $3 million from Thomas's deferred compensation. I watched the confirmations land in the foundation account, each transfer a quiet detonation. Within 48 hours, the first grants were cut, a 62-year-old former nurse opening a telehealth startup in rural Georgia, a 58-year-old laid-off teacher launching an urban farming collective in Detroit. Their thank you emails arrived within the week, gratitude untainted by Miller baggage. The revenge was silent, surgical, and crucially generative. No one lost a home. Someone gained a future. I slept better than I had in years. The world would call it betrayal. I called it balance. The wires cleared on a quiet Thursday. The foundation's ledger reflecting the Miller millions with clinical precision, and I allowed myself one exhale of satisfaction before the storm broke. It began with a single tweet from a financial gossip account. Billionaire heiress Clara Miller allegedly siphons family fortune into mystery fund insiders, call it elder abuse. By evening, the post had 500,000 impressions, screenshots of the subscription agreements circulating like contraband. Cable news picked it up at dawn. Chyrons screaming, fraud in the family and green queen or con artist. My phone vibrated off the desk with notifications. Some branding me a genius for outmaneuvering legacy wealth. Others a monster who preyed on aging parents. The split was surgical. Impact investors hailed the scholarship's, traditionalists decried the breach of filial duty. Aurora's client relations inbox filled with withdrawal requests and marriage proposals in equal measure. I watched the chaos unfold from the 42nd floor, the city a glittering circuit board below. Jonathan called first, voice calm. We expected blowback. Legal's ready. I thanked him and muted the ringer. The narrative was already writing itself. Prodigal daughter returns, seduces vulnerable relatives, vanishes with the silver. No mention of the malpractice suit. The offshore echoes the decades of conditional love. Just a tidy villain arc for the evening news. Evelyn seized the spotlight with theatrical timing. She appeared on a morning talk show filmed in the estate's rose garden sunlight, gilding her silver-streaked hair, a single tear tracking her powdered cheek. The host leaned in, sympathetic. Mrs. Miller, your daughter took $10 million under false pretenses. How does that feel? Evelyn dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. We taught her generosity, she said, voice trembling with practiced fragility. Richard and I opened every door, private schools, introductions, trust. We only wanted to help Thomas through a difficult time. Clara twisted that trust into something cruel. The camera zoomed on her clasped hands, knuckles white. She's brilliant. Yes, but brilliance without heart is just calculation. The clip went viral before the segment ended, Howard Miller matriarch, trending alongside stills of the family dining room I had once fled. By noon, the accusations had teeth. A tabloid published grainy photos of father leaving a cardiologist's office, caption. Elderly father devastated. Anonymous sources. Thomas's legal team no doubt leaked excerpts of the agreement, highlighting the charity clause in bold. Comment sections overflowed with pitchforks. She robbed her own mother. Blood money for woke points. Cancel Clara. My composure, honed in boardrooms and bankruptcy courts, became the eye of the hurricane. I declined every interview request, letting the noise crest without feeding it. Inside Aurora, the team circled wagons, press releases, drafted client calls, scripted the foundation's first grant recipients, queued for testimonials. I moved through the office like a chess piece in motion, every step deliberate. The counterstroke came on a Friday evening slot booked weeks earlier for an unrelated impact panel. The network Smelling Blood pivoted the segment to a live town hall. Clara Miller addresses family scandal. I arrived at the studio in the same navy suit from the reunion, hair pulled back severe, no jewelry except a thin gold watch. The host greeted me with the hungry politeness of a gladiator pit. Cameras rolled, the chyron pulsing confrontation. She began with Evelyn's tear. "Your mother says you betrayed her generosity. How do you respond?" I smiled, small and steady. Generosity is a word with many definitions. Let's define it with evidence. I signaled off stage. The control room cut to a split screen. On the left, the dining room CCTV time-stamped high definition captured the moment Evelyn signed her pen, moving with eager speed while she asked about board seats and photo ops. On the right, the contract itself, page 47, highlighted, all capital irrevocably directed to the Marion Legacy Foundation for Educational Grants. The host's eyes widened. I continued, voice level. My mother read every clause. So did my father. So did my brother after a private review. They understood the destination. They simply assumed the public wouldn't. The feed switched to the Foundation's website, live unfiltered. A 64-year-old former librarian from Akron accepted her scholarship on camera, tears in her eyes, as she described the coding academy that would launch her app for senior mobility. A 59-year-old Detroit widow showed the urban farm now feeding 300 families funded by the first Miller tranche. The host scrambled for footing. "But your family claims coercion." Coercion. I repeated, letting the word hang. The same coercion used when my art scholarship paid for my brother's credit cards. When warnings about risky partnerships were ignored to save face, the audience, half studio, half remote, leaned forward. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The footage spoke. The recipients spoke, the contract spoke. Twitter pivoted mid-broadcast, had Marion Legacy trending above #Miller Matriarch. Withdrawal requests slowed, then reversed. A pension fund in Oslo wired an unsolicited $50 million. Backstage, Jonathan waited with a single nod. The host, flustered, thanked me for my time. I walked out under the studio lights, the city night pressing against the glass doors, and felt the tide turn, not with a crash, but with the quiet certainty of water finding its level. The villain label peeled away like wet paper. They'd turned me into a villain. I simply returned the favor on live television. The studio doors closed behind me with a soft hiss. The roar of the live audience fading into the hum of Manhattan traffic, but the victory felt strangely hollow, like applause, echoing in an empty hall. My driver navigated the crosstown grid while I scrolled through the aftermath on my phone. Headlines flipping from scandal to vindication. The Foundation's donation page crashing under traffic. Jonathan texted a single thumbs-up emoji, the closest he came to celebration. I was drafting a thank you to the team when the call came from an unfamiliar Greenwich number. The nurse's voice was clipped professional. "Your father collapsed at home. Possible stroke. He's stable but asking for you." I told the driver to head north, the city lights blurring into streaks as we crossed the bridge. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee, fluorescent corridors stretching like tunnels. Evelyn sat in the waiting area, makeup smudged, clutching a paper cup that had gone cold hours ago. She stood when she saw me, arms half raised, then thought better of it. He coded once she whispered. They brought him back. Thomas was nowhere in sight. A doctor led me to the ICU, gown and gloves, mandatory, the monitors beeping a steady rhythm that felt too calm for the chaos outside. Father lay propped against white pillows, the left side of his face slack and IV dripping into his arm. His eyes, still sharp, still blue, tracked me as I pulled the plastic chair closer. He tried to speak the words slurred around the paralysis. I leaned in, taking his hand, the skin paper thin over prominent veins. Slow, I said. I'm here. The nurse adjusted the oxygen, then left us alone. He squeezed my fingers with surprising strength, a tear slipping from the corner of his good eye. Clara, he rasped, need to tell. I nodded, heart thudding against my ribs. The machines kept their vigil while he gathered breath. It wasn't Victor he managed. The bankruptcy. Evelyn. Each syllable cost him. She pushed the leverage. Wanted the club, the house, the name. Ignored warnings. Blamed Hale to save face. His chest hitched. I signed. To protect her. Protect you. The confessions spilled out in fragments, late-night arguments, forged signatures, a shell company to hide the bleed. Victor had been the scapegoat, his reputation collateral for Evelyn's ambition. Father had carried the lie for decades, believing the family facade worth more than truth. I sat frozen, the room tilting. All the years I'd painted him the architect of our ruin, the man who chose image over integrity. He had been complicit, yes, but not the mastermind. Evelyn's hunger for ascent had steered the ship onto the rocks, and he had lashed himself to the wheel to keep her afloat. His grip tightened. There's more. He swallowed hard. Marion. The name hit like a second stroke. Your grandmother. Evelyn's mother. Not dead. Cut her out. Social climb. Needed money. Took your scholarship to pay her debts. The monitors beeped faster. I stared at him, the pieces snapping into place with brutal clarity. The piano's brass plate, the way Evelyn flinched whenever art was mentioned, the scholarship vanishing without explanation. Marion hadn't been a distant advisor. She had been blood severed for the crime of being born without pedigree. Evelyn had erased her own mother to marry up, then erased my future to cover the tracks. Father's eyes pleaded. I knew. Said nothing. Thought, protecting you. His voice cracked. Failed. Shock coursed through me, cold and electric. The woman I had built my revenge against wasn't just cruel. She was a matricide of the soul, pruning her family tree to fit a frame. Father had enabled it, yes, but his silence had been fear, not greed. The man before me was broken, not triumphant. I saw the remorse etched in every tremor, the weight of decades pressing him into the bed. He wasn't asking forgiveness. He was offering truth, the only currency left. I squeezed his hand back, tears blurring the monitors. I see you, I whispered. The machines slowed his breathing evening. Outside the window, the sky shifted from dusk to dark, the city lights flickering on like a million small confessions. The revenge I had savored, the balance I had struck, suddenly tasted of ash. The villain I had toppled wasn't the monster I thought, and the hero I had crowned myself wasn't either. Revenge lost its flavor the moment I tasted the truth. The hospital corridor stretched like a tunnel of white noise, monitors fading behind me as I walked out into the night. Father's fractured confessions still pulsing in my ears. I drove south on autopilot, the estate gates opening with the same mechanical obedience they had shown years before. The house was dark, except for a single lamp in the foyer, its glow pooling on the marble like spilled honey. Evelyn waited on the staircase, wrapped in a silk robe the color of old bruises, her face stripped of the careful mask she wore for cameras. She rose when she saw me, hands fluttering as if to touch, but stopping short. The doctors called, she said, voice thin. He's asking for you again tomorrow. I nodded, stepping past her toward the study. She followed, heels clicking a nervous rhythm on the hardwood. Inside the room smelled of leather and desperation. Papers littered the desk. Past due notices. Liquidation statements. A bankruptcy petition half-filled in Father's spidery hand. Evelyn closed the door with a soft click. We're finished, she whispered. The trust is gone. The house is leveraged to the roof. Thomas's settlement ate the rest. If the bank calls the note next week. She trailed off, eyes pleading in a way I had never seen. You have resources. Aurora, Jonathan, a bridge loan, a restructuring, anything. For your father's sake. I set my purse on the chair, the weight of Victor's envelope inside it, a quiet anchor. You mean for your sake? My voice was calm, almost gentle. She flinched as if struck. Clara, please. We're family. I pulled the envelope free, laid it on the desk between us. Family, I repeated. Like Marion. Her breath caught. I opened the flap documents, sliding out birth certificates, a marriage license, a handwritten letter in faded ink. Your mother, my grandmother, the woman you erased to buy this house, this life. Evelyn's hand flew to her throat. Victor kept everything, I continued. The warning memos you ignored, the debts you hid behind my scholarship, the way you cut her out when she refused to play poor relation at your wedding. Tears welled, but I saw calculation beneath them. I did what I had to, she said. For all of us. You did it for appearances. I stepped closer, voice steady. You raised me to care about them, too. Congratulations, now that's all you have left. The words landed clean, no shout, no tremor. Her knees buckled. She caught the desk edge, knuckles white. I watched the facade crumble, the woman who had once towered over my childhood shrinking into the robe's folds. She sank to the carpet, sobbing without sound. I turned to leave the envelope still open like a wound. Behind me, a drawer scraped. I spun back. Evelyn held Father's old service revolver, the one he kept for emergencies that never came. The barrel trembled against her temple. I can't, she choked. Not like this. Time slowed. I crossed the room in 3 strides, hand closing over hers on the grip. The metal was cold, her fingers slick with sweat. No, I said, firm, but not cruel. I pried the gun free, the cylinder clicking open, bullets spilling like dull coins across the rug. She collapsed forward, forehead against my knee, keening. I knelt, arms around her shaking frame. Not embrace, but restraint. You don't get to escape, I murmured. Marion forgave you once in a letter you burned. She wrote that guilt is the only inheritance worth keeping. Live with it. Her sobs grew ragged, the fight leaking out with each breath. I held her until the storm passed, until she was limp and small against the desk leg. Compassion stirred, unexpected and unwelcome, threading through the justice I had sharpened for years. Saving her wasn't mercy. It was sentence. She would wake each morning to the mirror, to the empty rooms, to the scholarships bearing her mother's name. The punishment was precision itself, life fully felt. I helped her to the settee, poured water from the carafe, pressed the glass into her hand. She drank in gulps, eyes swollen but focused now on the scattered bullets. I gathered them one by one, the brass warm from the rug. When the last clicked into my palm, I stood. The bank won't call the note, I said. I'll see to that. But the terms are mine, and the truth stays public. She nodded, mute. I left the gun on the desk barrel, pointed away, a silent reminder. At the door, I paused. Father needs you tomorrow. Be there. She looked up, the robe slipping from one shoulder, and for the first time I saw not the tyrant, not the victim, but a woman unmoored. I closed the study door softly, the click final. Forgiveness can wait, living with guilt can't. The hallway outside the study felt colder than the night air, the echo of the door's soft click chasing me toward the grand staircase. I climbed slowly, each step measured the weight of Evelyn's surrender, still clinging to my skin like damp silk. Upstairs, the guest room waited with its familiar shadows, but sleep refused me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the scattered bullets from the revolver now tucked into a velvet pouch in my purse, and stared at the moonlit garden beyond the window. Dawn crept in pale ribbons before exhaustion finally pulled me under dreams, fractured by the sound of a gun that never fired. A sharp rap at the door woke me hours later. Thomas stood in the threshold, eyes red-rimmed hospital scrubs crumpled beneath a leather jacket. "It's Dad," he said, voice hoarse. "He's gone." The words landed flat, almost clinical, but his shoulders shook once before he steadied them. I dressed in silence, the same navy suit now wrinkled, and followed him to the garage. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of autumn leaves skittering across the windshield. Evelyn was already in the ICU waiting area, veiled in black, clutching a rosary, though she had never been religious. She didn't look at me when I arrived. The doctor met us outside Father's room, clipboard in hand. Massive cerebrovascular event at 4:30 a.m. We did everything we could. His tone was gentle, practiced. I nodded, stepping past him into the sterile space where machines had gone silent. Father lay still, the left side of his face relaxed in death, as it never had been in life, the monitors dark. A manila envelope rested on the bedside table, my name written in his shaky script. The nurse handed it to me with a quiet, "He asked us to wait until you came." I took it to the chapel down the hall, a small room with stained glass windows casting colored light across empty pews. The envelope was thick, sealed with wax the color of dried blood. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery, the Miller crest embossed at the top, and a legal document folded neatly beneath. I read the letter first, his words labored but deliberate. "Clara, if you're reading this, I've run out of time to say what I should have said years ago. The stroke gave me clarity. Not courage. Courage was always your domain. I leave the remainder of my assets, whatever the banks haven't claimed, to the Marion Foundation. The offshore accounts, the last of the equities, the lake house in New Hampshire. All of it. Let it fund the women you champion, the ones Evelyn and I never saw. You became what I was too afraid to be free. I watched you build something honest from the ruins I helped create, and I am prouder than any trophy or trust fund ever made me. Forgive me if you can. If not, live well, that is forgiveness enough. Your father, Richard." The legal pages confirm the bequest, irrevocable transfer, effective, immediately countersigned by his attorney the day before the second stroke. I traced the signature, the ink still crisp, and felt the first crack in the armor I had worn since childhood. The chapel's silence pressed in the colored light, shifting across the letter as morning advanced. Tears came, then hot and sudden, the first in longer than I could remember. They were not neat or cathartic. They were messy, choking, spilling over the paper and blurring the crest. I cried for the father who had stood silent while Evelyn sharpened her knives, for the man who had chosen safety over truth, for the stranger who had finally chosen me. Mixed emotions tangled, anger at his decades of complicity. Grief for the bond. We never had a strange tenderness for the remorse that had cost him his last breath. I folded the letter carefully, the legal pages crisp against my palm, and sat in the pew until the tears slowed. The chapel door opened once Evelyn, veiled and trembling, but she retreated without a word. Thomas never appeared. I was alone with the weight of inheritance, not of money, but of reckoning. Father's death became the hinge on which my healing turned. The anger that had fueled Aurora's rise, the cold precision of my plans, began to soften at the edges. I saw him not as the architect of my pain, but as a man trapped in the same gilded cage, his silence a different kind of prison. The bequest was not absolution. It was amendment, a final act of alignment with the daughter he had failed to protect. I left the chapel with the envelope tucked inside my coat, the wax seal broken, but the contents intact. Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke, and turning leaves a reminder that seasons end and begin again. At the Foundation's offices later that week, I filed the transfer documents myself, watching the lake house deed and the final brokerage statements convert into grant commitments. The first recipient under Father's gift was a 67-year-old former pianist from Saratoga. Her hands gnarled by arthritis, but her eyes bright with plans for a music therapy startup. I signed the check with his pen, the one he had used for the letter, and felt the circle close, not perfectly but truly. He finally gave me something no money ever could: peace. The peace. Father's letter, granted, settled over me like the first quiet snow, muffling the sharp edges of memory without erasing them. I arranged the funeral myself, rejecting the cathedral Evelyn suggested, and the society florist who had buried half of Greenwich in lilies. Instead, I chose the small Episcopal chapel on the edge of town, its stone walls weathered by 2 centuries of ordinary grief. The casket was plain oak. No brass handles. No engraved plaque. I sent handwritten notes to a handful of cousins and father's old golf partners. The rest of the world learned nothing. No obituary in the Times. No press release from Aurora. The day arrived gray and windless. The maples along the drive stripped bare their leaves, crunching under tires that arrived one by one. Inside the pews held fewer than 20 people. Evelyn sat in the front row, black veil lifted just enough to reveal eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Thomas stood beside her, tie askew, staring at the floor as if it might open and swallow him. I wore a simple charcoal dress, no jewelry, my hair pulled back with the same clip I had used at 16. The minister, a soft-spoken woman who had never met father, read a brief passage from Ecclesiastes about seasons and purposes. No eulogies, no anecdotes, no recitation of board positions or net worth. The silence that followed felt sacred, not empty. When she finished, the organist played nothing. The only sound was the creak of wood as we rose to file out. The graveside was even smaller, a rectangle of earth beneath an ancient yew. I had asked for no tent, no chairs. We stood in a loose semicircle, while the casket lowered on canvas straps, the ropes whispering through gloved hands. Evelyn swayed, but did not fall. Thomas stared at the hole as if it held answers. I dropped a single white camellia onto the lid, the flower father used to bring home on my birthdays before everything calcified. The minister spoke the final commendation voice, carrying on the still air. Then it was over. People drifted to their cars without lingering, the ritual complete in its austerity. I lingered longest, watching the groundskeeper begin to fill the grave, each shovelful of dirt a quiet punctuation. When the last car disappeared down the drive, I walked back to the chapel alone. The side door to the music room stood ajar, the way it always had when the cleaning crew forgot to lock up. Inside, the old Steinway waited exactly where it had for decades, its lid closed, the brass plate still reading its cryptic dedication. Dust motes danced in the thin light filtering through leaded windows. I lifted the fallboard, the keys cool and familiar beneath my fingertips. The forbidden piece came back without effort, an improvisation I had invented at 14 minor keys, weaving through major resolutions a conversation between sorrow and stubborn hope. Mother had banned it for being self-indulgent. I had not played it since the night my scholarship vanished. The notes filled the empty room, tentative at first, then surer. My hands remembered every turn, every pause where I had once hidden tears. The melody was no longer a rebellion. It was reclamation. I played without audience, without bitterness, letting the music carry the weight of what father had never said aloud. The final chord hung unresolved, then settled into silence. I closed the lid gently, the click soft as a heartbeat. Outside, a lone reporter waited behind the yew hedge, camera raised. I had not seen him arrive, had not heard the shudder. By evening, the clip aired on the local news, then national grainy footage of me at the piano, the chapel's arched window framing the scene like a painting. The anchor's voiceover was hushed. The billionaire who played for her father. Social media latched on the video, viewed millions of times before midnight. Comments poured in, some sentimental, some skeptical, all missing the point. I watched once, then turned off the screen. The past no longer owned me. The piano, the peace, the quiet graveside, they were mine to reclaim, not to weaponize. Father's final gift had been permission to feel without apology, to honor without performance. The world saw a moment. I lived the meaning. For the first time, the world watched and I didn't care. The world's gaze lingered for a week, then drifted to the next headline, leaving me free to move in the silence I had always preferred. I returned to the city with the piano's final chord still resonating in my chest, a note that refused to fade. The scars of my upbringing, conditional love, erased dreams, stolen futures, no longer bled. They had become the raw material for something sturdier. I leased a converted warehouse in Red Hook, its brick walls echoing with the ghosts of shipping crates and salt air. and poured father's remaining bequest into a vision that had been forming since the first scholarship check cleared. The Marian Aurora Academy opened its doors 6 months later, a living curriculum for women over 50 who had been told their best years were behind them. The space was spare but intentional, long communal tables of reclaimed oak whiteboards that rolled like sails, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the harbor's slow dance of ferries and gulls. I designed the program myself, 12-week intensives in venture mechanics, regulatory navigation, and the quiet art of saying no to bad money. Applicants arrived with resumes folded in purses, eyes wary from decades of being overlooked. A former bank teller from Queens wanted to fund micro-lending in her old neighborhood. A retired nurse from Milwaukee carried spreadsheets for a telemedicine platform. A widow from Santa Fe sketched an app for grief support on the back of an envelope. I read every story, felt every tremor of hope, and saw my own reflection in their determination to begin again. Kelly's email arrived, unannounced, subject line, simply, "Permission to try." She had spent the intervening years rebuilding her own credibility, advising nonprofits pro bono. Her name scrubbed from the scandal sheets. I met her in the warehouse before the first cohort, the space still smelling of sawdust and fresh paint. She stood by the windows, thinner hair cropped short, the bravado I remembered replaced by something humbler. "I don't expect trust," she said, "but I know every mistake I made and I can teach others to avoid them." I studied her for a long moment, the betrayal still a faint scar, then handed her the curriculum binder. "First class starts Monday. You'll co-teach ethics and due diligence. One misstep and you're out." She nodded, eyes bright with the same relief I had once felt when Jonathan offered me $5 million and a second chance. The Academy's inaugural session filled in 48 hours, 20 women chosen from 300 applications. Kelly took the podium on day one, voice steady as she dissected her own collapse, the leaked deck. The mother's illness, the moment greed overrode loyalty. The cohort leaned forward, notebooks open, recognizing the cautionary tale, not as failure, but as tuition already paid. I watched from the back, arms folded, feeling the room shift from individual wounds to collective strength. By week 6, they were pitching to real investors' seed funds. I had courted quietly. Family offices tired of 20-something founders. The first close came from the Queen's teller, $2 million for her lending cooperative terms negotiated by a classmate who had once been downsized at 62. Word spread through channels the media could not map. A profile in a niche finance newsletter called me the silent architect of change, the phrase sticking like burrs on wool. Reporters requested tours. I declined, letting the graduates speak instead. A 70-year-old former CFO from Chicago appeared on a podcast, describing how the Academy taught her to value her gray hair as an asset. The clip went viral in LinkedIn circles, applications doubling overnight. Jonathan stopped by one evening, standing amid the bustle of mock pitch practice, his smile soft. "Emily would have loved this," he said, and I felt the circle widen to include the wife I never met. Each scar became a classroom. The nights I had spent reconciling cafe tips taught budgeting modules. The betrayal that sank Aurora's first iteration became a case study in fiduciary duty. The scholarship stolen for a Porsche fueled sessions on intergenerational equity. I walked the floor during breaks, refilling coffee, listening to stories of divorces that left women penniless, of boardrooms that silenced them at 55, of dreams deferred until retirement checks arrived. Their laughter startled, then genuine, filled the warehouse like sunlight through cracked brick. I laughed too, the sound surprising me with its ease. By the end of the first year, the Academy had seeded 11 ventures, created 90 jobs, and returned capital to investors at rates that silenced skeptics. Kelly stayed on her redemption, measured in the confidence of women who now called her mentor. I stood on the loading dock one twilight, watching the last student leave with a term sheet clutched like a diploma, and felt the past fold into the present without friction. The pain had not vanished. It had been repurposed, transmuted into doorways others could walk through. I didn't rebuild my past, I repurposed it. The loading dock's metal door rolled shut behind the last graduate, the clang echoing through the warehouse like a bell marking the end of another cycle. I stood in the sudden quiet, the harbor wind carrying the faint scent of brine and diesel, and felt the past settle into its final shape. Not a burden to carry, but a foundation to stand upon. Months blurred into a rhythm of cohorts and closings, the Academy's reputation growing through word of mouth rather than press releases. I walked the city streets with a lighter step, the weight of old wounds transmuted into the steady pulse of purpose. One spring afternoon, an invitation arrived in the mail, thick cream stalk embossed with the logo of the Greenwich Historical Society. My Steinway had been donated anonymously and restored for public display. An opening reception was scheduled for the following Saturday. I slipped the card into my pocket and knew it was time. The museum sat on a rise overlooking the Sound, its white columns softened by ivy. I arrived early, the parking lot still empty, the gravel crunching under my boots. Inside, the air smelled of lemon oil and old paper, the hush of a place that preserved rather than performed. A docent led me through galleries of ship models and sepia photographs to a small alcove at the rear. There it stood, the grand piano polished to a deep ebony glow, its legs steady on a low dais, a velvet rope keeping visitors at a respectful distance. The brass plate gleamed. "To my dearest Marion, may your songs never fade." A discreet plaque beside it read, "Gift of an anonymous donor in memory of resilience." I stepped over the rope when the docent turned away, my fingers brushing the fallboard as they had decades ago. The keys were warm from display lights, the action responsive despite years of silence. I did not play. I simply rested my hands where they had once found refuge, feeling the vibration of memory in the wood. A folded note protruded from beneath the music desk, the paper heavy, the ink fresh. I unfolded it carefully. From Marion, for the girl who turned silence into a symphony. You were never the epilogue. You were the overture. With enduring admiration, Victor Hale, the signature looped with familiar elegance, the same hand that had offered to buy Aurora years before. The revelations settled gently, no shock, only recognition. Victor and Marion, lovers separated by Evelyn's ambition, bound by a promise kept across decades. He had watched from the shadows, his buyout offer a test, his silence a shield. The donation was his final gesture. The piano returned not as relic, but as bridge. I traced the words, seeing the threads now, the warnings ignored, the partnership dissolved, the quiet funding that had kept the Academy's lights on during lean months. He had been ally all along, his love for Marion, the compass that pointed him toward me. I slipped the note into my pocket and stepped back, the alcove's light catching the piano's curves like moonlight on water. Outside the reception was beginning, caterers arranging trays, guests murmuring over champagne. I walked through the crowd, unnoticed, the chatter parting around me. Across the lawn, a temporary LED screen had been erected for the occasion, looping a montage of the Society's treasures. My face appeared unexpectedly, the old Bloomberg clip from the Sustainable Summit, my voice steady as I spoke of patient capital and second chances. The camera panned to the Academy's graduates, their ventures ticking across the screen in bold captions. I paused on the grass, the wind lifting my hair, and smiled, not for the lens, not for the crowd, but for the girl who had once believed silence was surrender. The circle was complete. Revenge had burned hot and clean, consuming the lies that bound me. Redemption had followed, unexpected and humbling, in hospital rooms and chapel pews. Legacy now stretched forward, rooted in the scars I had chosen to repurpose rather than conceal. The piano behind glass, the note in my pocket, the screen's glow. They were markers on a path that began with a dinner table insult and ended with women launching empires at 65. I turned from the screen, the museum's columns framing a sky turning rose with evening, and felt the past release its grip entirely. They once said I was useless. Now I build what lasts longer than pride legacy. The candlelight flickered across the polished mahogany table, casting long shadows that mirrored the coldness in my parents' eyes. It was supposed to be a family dinner, a ritual of forced smiles and unspoken resentments in our sprawling estate. But as I sat there, 26 and freshly quit from my high-powered bank job to chase ethical investing, The venom spilled out. "You're stupid and useless," Mom sneered, her voice slicing through the air like a knife. Dad chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Get a real job, Clara. Stop making us look bad in front of everyone." The relatives nodded awkwardly, my brother Thomas basking in their praise as the golden child. My dreams dismissed like crumbs on the floor. I said nothing. No outburst, no tears. Just a quiet pushback from the table, my chair scraping the marble floor like a final exhale. I left the room, the weight of their laughter echoing behind me, vowing in silence that this humiliation would fuel something unbreakable. That night, as they settled into the living room with their evening news ritual, the TV screen lit up. There I was, poised on Bloomberg, announcing my firm's latest coup, managing a $1 billion ethical investment fund. The anchor hailed me as a visionary, my net worth flashing in bold, a billion-dollar empire built from the ashes of their doubt. The room fell deathly silent. Dad's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. For the first time, he saw me, not as the failure, but as the force they'd underestimated. But this is just the beginning. Stick around and you'll uncover the shocking twists, betrayals from those I trusted most. A family secret that shattered everything, and the ultimate revenge that turned their world upside down. By the end, you'll feel the sweet rush of justice served proof that silence can roar louder than words. What happened next will leave you breathless. If this story of rising from humiliation to triumph has you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss the full 16-part journey. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated by family or turned pain into power? Your stories fuel this channel. Let's build a community of silent warriors who roar back. Watch until the end because legacy always outlasts pride.